baseball game you're in, you feel like you got a chance.
Got a chance, absolutely. I wish he got there with two out. I wish he'd gotten there with one, which would have left the sac fly in effect. Because at that point, Salvi could have hit out of the infield and scored. But you remember, well, were you following the Royals in the late 70s and 80s? Oh yeah. Well, you know that we got our brains beat in every year by the Yankees up until 80. When we finally made the series, and then we fumbled as those guys got all that experience that finally paid off. We're doing the same thing now.
Yeah, because it's nice to know. We're a 2-out contract.
Right.
Trust me, it's good.
We're saving money.
God, that was so good.
It's the Leaning Tower.
It's not radioactive.
Angela's not going to be here till 7. All right, we're going to go ahead and start in the interest of time. It is 5 o'clock. So we want to thank everyone for being here tonight. I want to ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll.
You are hereby notified that I have called a special session of the Unified Government of Whiteside County, Kansas City, Kansas, to be held Thursday, October 30th at 5:30 p.m. for the Event Center update. Immediately following will be an executive session regarding litigation. Roll call: Walker,
Here.
Townsend, McKiernan,
Here?
Mejia, Maddox,
Here.
Kane,
Here.
Markley, Walters,
Here.
Philbrook, Collins.
Here, we do have communication from two commissioners, Philbrook and Townsend, who have said they are running late, but they are en route, so we appreciate that communication. But we're going to go ahead and get started, and we did, this group during the budget authorized a feasibility study for a multi-purpose event or / convention space. And so we have, we did an RFP process and received multiple bids, selected CSL, and they're here tonight to give us our presentation. Mr. Connor?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. So this evening, we've got the first iteration of the report on the multipurpose event convention space study. Bill Kruger is with us today. Bill is the lead on this project for CSL International. And there's just been a series of interviews held. This has been about a 10-week process, so it's a little bit accelerated, and we appreciate Bill's efforts on that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bill to go through the slide deck.
Mayor, Commissioners, good to be here. Everybody recovering from the Royals loss last night?
No.
No, not yet. I'm a diehard Minnesota Twins fan, so I can kind of commiserate with the few and far between championship runs. So anyways, it's good to be back here, though. We've been doing this for about 10 weeks now, so it's good to be back to meet with you and to discuss what we found and talk about some of the due diligence and the research that we put into this project. A little bit of background about myself. My name is Bill Kruger with Convention Sports and Leisure International. I'm a principal with that firm, been doing this for about 20 years. Our firm's been around for about 25 years or so. We've done projects in basically every state. We've done a number of projects within this marketplace and Missouri, Kansas, and throughout the entire country and North America. Anything related to event facilities, so anything related to sports facilities, entertainment, convention, trade show, meetings, conference, hotels, any of those kind of facilities like that, we get involved with planning. And so we've got a wide variety of experience throughout the country of all different types. And so let me just start with this. I've got a number of slides, and I think this presentation right here forms the backbone of the written report that we're going to be that we're close to finishing. So that's going to be another 2 to 3 weeks, and then we'll have that written report that provides narrative with all this information too. That is going to provide some more detail and more information. There's a lot of slides up here. I'm going to be flipping through some of them fairly quickly, so we can try to get through this in about 30 minutes. I'll get through some discussion of what we've done and then try to hit some of the major high points, and then I'd be happy to entertain any discussion and questions that you've got, certainly to pick my brain while I'm here in terms of any insight I've got into some of the questions that you may have and some of the issues at hand. So briefly, in terms of what the scope of our study was, it was termed in the RFP a multi-purpose convention event facility or something of that nature. So the reason why I'm kind of addressing this is when I go around the country, and I've done probably about 300 projects of some sort, whether it's large market, small market, mid-sized market, anything related to event facilities, there's tends to be a lot of discussion or different ideas as to what people are thinking or what the concept is when you're talking about event facility or convention center or arena or what have you. And so part of our scope under this case was really to help understand and define what the concept truly is in terms of a building. What are we trying to address? What kind of event types are we really focused in on? And what's the best fit for Wyandotte, Kansas City, Kansas, in terms of a event facility that was kind of structured and defined within the RFP as a vehicle that can drive visitation, new attendance, and new visitation to Wyandotte County and Kansas City, Kansas, both in terms of economic impact and then also quality of life issues too. So there's kind of a balance, like there is in many different communities that we work in around the country, of both local and non-local users and events and attendees and participants. So that was kind of the focus of us at the very outset, was to help define at least a few different building models that we can analyze in terms of what the best fit, if any, would be for a building here. And I'll just say as a caveat, certainly with every project that we do, we always take a very objective look at it. We've been hired in a number of different communities where we've recommended not to do anything. In particular, in Kansas City, Missouri, when we did the Bartle Hall Convention Center expansion study, now the Kansas City Convention Center, we did the last feasibility study for expansion of that project, and we did in fact recommend not expanding the exhibit space and instead adding enhancing the ballroom space and enhancing some of the aesthetics too. So certainly it's not preordained that we'd recommend something. We want to make sure that there's a market, an incremental market, to support something here locally, and that's really what a big focus of our effort was. As you'll see up there, everything under the phase one, or the task one, the market analysis, all those different tasks we undertook to understand what this area has to offer in terms of amenities, strengths and weaknesses, how they relate to an event facility project of some sort, what kind of private partnering opportunities might we have, looked at local market infrastructure, population, transportation, other types of amenities. And a big part of what we do in any study is reaching out to the potential customers. So a big part of what we do is talking to potential users, whether they're conventions, conferences, promoters of touring entertainment acts and the like, and asking them specific questions about if we built something, would you use it in terms of producing events and attending events, and then also what do you need in terms of a type of building and other types of amenities to help support that. So flowing through the entire scope here, first is understanding what the market is. The second is, once we understand what the market demand is, where the incremental areas of market demand would be for a project, then we can help define and outline the best optimal project to meet those market requirements. So what's kind of a market supportable building program and development options in terms of a building product? And then thinking about things such as site location, and then quantifying performance, so utilization projections, attendance, and then getting through the cost benefit. So we always end up with that cost benefit in terms of the cost to build, the cost to run, and then the benefits focusing on economic impact, new visitation, new hotel room nights, new economic spending, new jobs created, new tax dollars generated locally. Let me flip through some of these. Those are a lot of small words up there, and I guess I didn't realize how small they would be. Bottom line is, this is to help shape our understanding of a building project. The question often is, are we talking about an arena? Are we talking about a convention center? There's a lot of talk around the country about being multi-purpose and being flexible. And based on our industry experience and our experience around the country and our understanding of industry best practices, the modern facility oftentimes can be flexible, but in many times it's beneficial to have a building that can lean in a certain direction in terms of what the identity is, from the bricks and mortar to the operational policies and procedures and booking and tenants and things like that. So there's a variety of different types of venues. There's sports venues, there's performance-related venues, whether they be amphitheaters or theaters, and then there's meetings in terms of events. And so oftentimes there's some facilities such as arenas, civic centers, and multi-purpose event centers that can kind of do a variety of those things, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's our recommendation in many cases to have a certain type of a building product of an identity. You really can't be everything to everybody. I keep going back to my experience locally in Minneapolis. They had the Metrodome in Minneapolis. Baseball and football, it really couldn't accommodate either of those sports well individually. So ultimately, kind of the trend around the country is to get a little bit more specialized and more single purpose. There is some multi-purpose flexible aspects to all those venues, but still you're leaning in a certain direction. And I think that's good advice here for a project, possible project here locally. A lot of different facility requirements. All those events on the left are different individual events, and the different colors up here on this grid highlight things that tend to be more important. So along the top are different types of characteristics of the building and outside the building. And as you can see, there's kind of a jumble of color and lack of color on there. And so what that's kind of highlighting is the challenge that a number of buildings, event facilities have in trying to be everything to everybody, in terms of different types of users require and prefer different types of things. The one trend that we're seeing around the country clearly over the last decade is thinking and strategic planning outside the box. There are many communities around the country that had hoped that just simply building the facility, if you build it, they will come, doesn't stand up in many cases. Often it's the strength of the destination, it's the strength of the things outside the box that can tend to be most appealing when you're trying to attract non-local groups and non-local events and users and attendees and energize areas, with bodies, whether they be local or non-local. It's really the entertainment, the visitor-friendly, the pedestrian-friendly entertainment districts and amenities within walking distance, whether it be retail, with character, restaurants, bars, nightlife, entertainment, things like that. Places around the country as a part of an effort to develop convention or event facility products. Oftentimes there's thinking again of this strategic planning that goes outside the box to make an appealing sub-destination to attract the events in the first place. And so when I look at your community and I look at Village West, I see an enormous asset or a set of assets in the infrastructure that you've got in place there. You've got nationally recognized attractions and entertainment assets and infrastructure as it exists right now. In an ideal sense, when you look at some of these pictures about all the bars and the connectivity of some of these things within walking distance, there are some challenges with respect to Village West and the different pieces within the greater district in terms of where they're located and how do we get people easily to and from some of those different attractions out there. But by and large, what you've got in Village West and all those assets in the private sector investment and the public sector investment are things across the country that many communities are striving to at least achieve just a subset of what you've already got. So I think that's a real important basis, what you've got out there in terms of thinking about what could be possible in terms of synergy and leveraging existing assets that you've got out there, because you certainly have a number of pieces in place. So in working with you and with some of the project representatives here, we really honed in on 3 different building scenarios to specifically evaluate in more detail. So when we're, again, talking initially at the outset of a convention/event facility, again, getting back to the issue of we need to kind of define building scenarios that would be practical or realistic in the modern age to think about within that terminology. So we came up with 3 different scenarios. One would be a scenario A, which would be an arena plus multi-purpose is what we're calling it. So for all intents and purposes, it is a spectator entertainment arena that has the ability to do sports, in particular minor league sports of some sort, whether it be hockey or basketball, but state of the industry. So we see a lot of these mid-sized arena venues around the country. You know, you've got a version of that. You got the large NBA, NHL arena, the type quality in Sprint Center, but then you've got the smaller version in Independence. And then this would be along the lines of more of like an Independence type of venue, the Independence Event Center, something that fits about the 7 to 10,000 seat, whereas Sprint Center is more like the 20,000 seats. But certainly state of the art in terms of amenities. Fixed seating, some retractable seating elements, but all the premium seating that you would need to attract top tenants and to drive revenue and income within your buildings. You know, all the amenities and the locker rooms and the signage and sponsorship opportunities and the scoreboard and all the equipment and all those things that you see in modern arena facilities. Very flexible venues that can do lots of things, but really geared towards attracting entertainment and sporting type events. But also as a part, an adjunct of that, as we're seeing around the country, and to a certain extent, you know, Independence, as an example, has that community ice sheet that's tacked onto their building too. But the interest in looking at a model like that and also leveraging that particular infrastructure and that facility product, and then creating some additional multi-purpose event space as a part of that building model. So that's what scenario A would be. I'll come back to that a little bit more in terms of defining what that additional multi-purpose space might look like. Scenario B would be more of a traditional convention center. So it's interesting when we're going through these kickoff visits and kickoff meetings at the outset of this project, we're talking to all these different groups in the community, and we ask them, what do you think we need here? And then, you know, some people will specifically say, well, we need like the Overland Park Convention Center. Other people will say we need an arena. Other people will say we need a big flexible box that can do 1,500 people for an event, or 1,500 seated person event. So there's just different conceptions from the very get-go in terms of what type of product is really needed or desired within the community. So the scenario B would be more the traditional convention center. So high quality space. Normally they've got concrete floor exhibit space, they've got carpeted upscale ballroom space, they've got breakout meeting space. They almost always come with a full service 3 to 4 star headquarter hotel, a large full service hotel. As an example, under scenario B, you'd kind of think of an Overland Park Convention Center model is what you'd think of when you're thinking about scenario B. You know, the challenge with that model is everything is optimized towards attracting the non-local conventions, and in today's marketplace, you really need a full service hotel that's attached to it of a certain quality, of a certain flag, of a certain type, of a certain brand, of a certain size, to be able to support that facility project and to make the entire model work. And so, as you know, in Overland Park's case, what they ended up doing is to get the right size and the right type of hotel next to it, they ended up building the public sector, building the hotel themselves. So publicly financing a hotel as a part of their convention center model. And then scenario 3, or scenario C, is the indoor multi-purpose building. So flat floor building, no fixed seating as a part of that. A large, relatively low finish box that may be geared more towards indoor sports and other types of uses that you could use a big indoor space. So trade show, consumer show, sports show, garden show, flea markets. You can go down to, you know, you could, if you have the right equipment in there, it'd be geared towards amateur sports like basketball, volleyball, gymnastics, cheer, dance, wrestling. There's lots of different things that indoor amateur sports facilities like that can do. You've got the training center, training academy, and the Sporting KC affiliated project going up. Largely more of the soccer and some of those other ancillary sports focus. but certainly the indoor amateur sports flexible multi-purpose building is another option. So I'll kind of breeze through a number of these for the essence of time to try to get to more of the conclusions here. But in local market, we did a lot of due diligence with respect to population, demographics, where you're located in terms of other major population areas, driving and getting people in for non-local type events. And again, Village West, just some really interesting opportunities in terms of potential partner opportunities, synergy with other types of attractions. You know, when we look at the flavor of Village West, it just in terms of the family friendly, the entertainment, the sports related focus, entertainment, you know, some retail and leisure and entertainment and those kind of things like that. Just a number of pieces that are widely known within the region, that have established themselves in terms of market draw. And right now, you've got a lot of possibilities, and so a lot of different site options, frankly, to look at out in that area in terms of where we might place this and where the benefits and synergies might lie in terms of partnering or co-locating or locating in adjacent areas. We looked at all the different pieces, focusing on understanding what they're doing, what their ownership and what their business models are and what their performance have been historically. You know, when you think about, in particular, attracting in non-local attendees and events and exhibitors or participants or whatever, a lot of times, you know, the characteristics of the lodging inventory at the site or nearby will help shape and govern ultimately what you could accomplish or what you could pull off in terms of an event facility project. So right now, relative to, if you just think of Village West as an example, relative to other cities where some of these facility projects might exist, if you look at larger cities, oftentimes they'll have a lot more array of full-service hotels. You've got a fairly limited array right now out there at Village West of the full-service hotels of any sort, a lot of limited service, select service, focus service properties, smaller in nature. And again, kind of going back to the Overland Park example, when they're trying to pull off that size of a convention product to optimize everything, they couldn't get away with doing a 100-room hotel to help support that as a headquarter hotel. They needed a certain size of property because certain groups are not willing to split up their room block amongst a variety of different properties. They all want to be under one roof.
What size is that hotel in Overland Park?
411 rooms, I believe.
411, so to give us some scale
Yeah.
comparison. Thank you.
Exactly, yep. So that's the Sheraton at I believe it's 411. I know it's right around 400 rooms. So that's, again, the private sector, there was a pretty large feasibility gap for that to happen purely from the private sector, that particular type of hotel. And so in their case, they did what a lot of communities are doing around the country, which is to optimize and the best optimize the investment in the convention center. They felt it needed to get the right kind of hotel product in place right next to it. And so that's what they ended up building. And, you know, when you talk about a hotel of that quality in you know, today's marketplace, to get a commensurate product, you're talking about an upper upscale chain scale hotel, which normally is, you know, you start that cost at about $200,000 per key. And so you start running those numbers, you know, for a building, you know, that if we wanted to build that same type of full service hotel of 400 rooms or so, you know, what we've been modeling under that scenario would be about $220,000 per key. And so that's a very expensive project. Hotel. That being said, in some cases where the feasibility gap for a hotel like that is small enough, oftentimes there's just an incentive that's required by the public sector, and then the private sector can respond and invest a fair portion of the private sector capital to help make that. So that's a nice private sector investment when that can happen. The first thing we looked at is the competitive marketplace for the convention and meeting facilities, and you know, there's a lot of detail here that we don't need to stop too long on, other than to say, if there's any questions we can come back to this, but other than to say that in the you know, we took a close look at the inventory of competitive convention products within the greater marketplace. And so you're thinking about the big convention center and then all the other things in between. So you've got, there's certain minimum size parameters that we employed here other than the Reardon Center and the Great Wolf, just because they're so close nearby within our marketplace. But there's a number of products located within your greater marketplace. And so relative to other markets around the country,
you're probably at the higher end in terms of your existing competitive supply that's already in place. So that's something important to keep in mind when we're thinking about this type of building product moving forward. And in terms of indoor sports facilities, again, this is a big indoor, low finish, flexible, multi-purpose, kind of a big old box where you can just have the right type of equipment and you can be doing lots of sports tournaments, basketball tournaments, volleyball tournaments, lots of indoor things of a variety of different types. There's a number of them. I just was out at the sports pavilion at Rock Chalk Park a couple weeks ago and then saw that. That's brand new and just recently opened, but that's more of a dedicated use. They've got, 100,000 square feet of hardwood floors is permanent, so they've got, a fixed basketball, kind of a volleyball use set with that. Many of these are more flexible in that they've got temporary floor surfacing that they put down to be able to do a variety of different things, sport court versus hardwood versus concrete, a variety of different types. But by and large then, when you look at all this, when you think about some of the indoor space that's going in with the training academy, the soccer training academy, and then also the discussion in Parkville and some of the other facilities within the regional area that have been discussed, this is an area where a number of communities are focusing some of their investment in, and there's a fairly competitive array of these kind of venues that are kind of popping up and that already exist right now too. So from a competitive standpoint, there's a fairly high level of competition already in place with regard to that, this type of product. So spectator entertainment facilities, when we look at the greater Kansas City metropolitan area, these are the fixed seating venues in many cases. Some of them are just more concert venues that may just have chairs on the ground or amphitheater and outdoor venues as well. But these are where concerts and touring entertainment acts and sporting events are held, and there's a whole variety of them within the greater Kansas City metro area, all the way from the Arrowhead Stadium and Kauffman and the Speedway, all the way down to some of the small music halls and theaters and amphitheaters. So there's a variety of different things. From my perspective, with my travels around the country, anecdotally, what I can tell you is that you've got, not only do you have a pretty sophisticated array of concert venues and entertainment venues already in place in the greater market area right now, you also have, you've got a, kind of an atypical concentration of, I guess, power, if you want to phrase it that way, in terms of, AEG being a pretty dominant force in the promoting side of the equation here locally, both with this interest in the Sprint Center, but, it promotes, it's with Live Nation, those two are the biggest concert promoters and entertainment promoters in the country, certainly, and they control a lot of the market. And so that's something that we just need to keep our eyes on or keep tabs on. If we go down the road of creating in an entertainment event venue in terms of how they may react, whether they're a partner or whether they're a foe, if you want to cast it in terms of black and white terms, but money talks, and at the end of the day, how they fit into the equation, I think, is going to be real relevant to look at if we're thinking about a spectator and entertainment venue. So we also extended our reach, a lot of venues here, but we looked at a variety of comparable facilities. So for each one of these venues that are similar in some way to what we are looking at for each of these three building types, we evaluated every one of these. We talked to building management. We got event reports. We got financial operating statements. We got attendance reports and economic impact statements. We inventoried their facility characteristics and their support facilities in terms of hotels and everything else. So we did a fair amount of due diligence in evaluating industry best practices and benchmarking as it relates to other types of similar comparable arena, convention center, and indoor sports and multi-purpose venues around the country. We're going to just flip through a lot of these here, but just as an example, this is just arena facilities. These are 7 or 8 of them that all that data up there is actually breaking down and summarizing an annual level of events by type, by attendance, annual attendance, per event attendance. Part of this is all of our exercise to help us understand the characteristics of the industry, and then from which we can infer and we can help extrapolate and then evaluate and analyze what might be possible here in Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. Likewise, financial operating statements, lots of numbers up here that you can't read, but what I'll say is that across the board, there are a fair number of these, about half of them on the arena side of the equation for this size venue, meaning the ones that don't have NBA, NHL tenants, so they're more minor league sports of some sort, or collegiate, or something like that. These kind of arena venues, I'd say about half of them are financially requiring a subsidy, an operating subsidy annually. So not including debt service, just from the pure operations standpoint too. So it's not a slam dunk that they're all going to be profitable. If you build one of these things in terms of financial operations, a lot of it really depends on the type of tenant you've got in there. If you've got multiple tenants, what kind of lease terms you've got, and then your success in going after a variety of the touring concerts and entertainment acts that most of these venues can ultimately live and die on. We've got a bunch of case studies here that will be in the final report. That's the Independence Center, just as an example. They've got the CHL, the ECHL tenant in there, and another indoor soccer league tenant. They've got that secondary community ice sheet that's kind of off to the side of it. But this is kind of an example. Sincombs Deathlefts designed this, and they're one of the biggest designers, along with Populous, of some of these mid-sized, smaller market kind of arena venues. And so the reason why I'm focusing on Independence is, they would kind of represent on the other side of the market area, another type of venue that theoretically there will be competition if we build something like this going back and forth between those two venues. They just turned over operations to private management to Global Spectrum for this particular venue too. Shifted it away from the city owned or city managed scenario. Okay, convention centers. We looked at a variety of different convention centers, and I will get to this point real quick just to summarize this high level stuff. So on the convention center side of the equation, around the country, over the last 30 years, it's fairly held consistent that about 9 out of 10 of them, in terms of the Overland Park kind of convention center model, so the smaller, mid-size, or secondary market convention facilities of the traditional sense, will be operating at a deficit every year. So an operational deficit, again, excluding debt service, but they require a subsidy. Normally communities invest in them for the economic impact, for the spin-off, for the new visitation, and the new tax dollars and the new room nights that they can generate for a community. But it's interesting to note that the two facilities that are showing a profit there are ones right kind of in your neighborhood. One is St. Charles, Missouri, and one is Overland Park. And the way that, the commonalities between the venues that can either break even or show a profit, frankly, are those that have a high level of, atypical corporate business, like in Overland Park's example, or in St. Charles's example, where they can draw lots of day trip corporate stuff and activity to the venue and to generate higher profits than normal. So by and large, though, normally the operating deficit of at least a couple $100,000 is something that's normally expected for a building like this. Okay. All right, I'm going to start go to some of the basics here. We looked at some of the indoor youth sports facilities of a variety of different types. A lot of them are focused on baseball, basketball, wrestling, volleyball, cheer, things like that. This is just a comparison of the market-wide inventory. This is convention facilities only. So on the far left graph over there is showing the number of facilities of a certain size that are defined down below, 25,000 square feet or greater of convention space within the overall market, so the number of venues. So when you go across the page here to the right side chart, that shows you the total convention facility square footage in the market, the greater metro market, relative to its population. And so what that's showing is Kansas City in the convention square footage from all of its venues in the greater marketplace is a little bit higher than average in terms of supply relative to other peer markets. We did the same exercise for spectator and entertainment venues. Now, the one thing you'll notice on the far right there is you're near the higher end of that equation in terms of the number of seats per population for your greater metro area. So all these aggregate kind of calculations are also kind of important. A big part of what we did was market surveys. So these are the different surveys that we ended up doing where we actually reached out and talked to people on the telephone. We did telephone surveys of national events state and regional events, amateur sports organizations. So we talked to touring event promoters, we talked to convention planners, conference planners, trade show, consumer show, entertainment acts, local entertainment, sports organizations for tournaments and competitions and meets. Did a whole host of different interviews and surveys and reached out to a lot of different people. So that really forms the basis of our understanding of the unique market of a Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas facility. So in the arena facility model, we're saying that the local market area right now, in terms of talking to some of the promoters and what we heard when we spoke to them is, there's a number of different things that we have to keep our eye on. The Independence Event Center can accommodate smaller shows. The Sprint Center can accommodate the biggest shows. Right now, the feel is from the promoter market is that there's a pretty good fit in terms of the array of venues right now in the marketplace. That being said, certainly if there's a more attractive location, a more attractive facility, a better opportunity for these promoters to make money, they'll consider anything, to be honest. Primary spectator entertainment facilities, as you see here, this is Polestar. So this is ticketed events by the key venues in 2013. This isn't every show that takes place in these venues, but it kind of starts to capture a little bit in terms of the magnitude of where this activity is happening. And as you'll see there, sorted by the right gross ticket revenue column, Sprint Center is really that 800-pound gorilla in terms of the promoted ticketed events in the greater marketplace. And then you got a wide variety of other venues kind of contributing in terms of the ticketed concert and entertainment events. So, arena model, other issues. Unless the Sprint Center attracts an NBA, NHL primary tenant that could impact date availability, Sprint Center and AEG will continue to control the market more or less in terms of these touring, concert, entertainment, family show, entertainment types of events that are of the touring nature. We think that some kind of a collaborative agreement with AEG or Live Nation, the two big promoter powerhouses, would be something that we'd have to take a close look at in terms of best positioning any investment or product to leverage our ability to maximize success opportunity. And the one thing, going back to this, it says that, the promoter feedback that we got really suggests that the success or failure of an arena oftentimes is largely tied to the success or failure of the primary tenant. And when we look around the country, minor league sports tenants oftentimes are kind of shifting and they're moving around and, they don't often stick around in a market for very long, and that's more the exception than the rule. Just as an example, and I'm sure some of these teams will look familiar to you, but there's been a number of teams just over the last couple decades that have popped up and then have gone away or evolved or moved to a different market or disbanded or shifted to a different city or whatever. But there's some core event tenants that have stuck around for a while and had staying power, but then others have. Which is typical in any market, have kind of moved around. So the point being is, if we go down the road of investing in an event facility project that may be an arena or that may require a sports tenant of some sort, a minor league tenant, it really puts the emphasis on thinking about ways to enhance and to incentivize long-term stability, so to speak, and or to plan for a situation where maybe the tenant ultimately goes away. And what happens then if we lose a tenant in terms of the financial operating characteristics of the building? On the convention center model, just real quick, we did these surveys of event planners. We focused in on national event markets. We looked at sizing. We looked at asked them what they needed in terms of space, what they liked about amenities and what things they're really looking for in terms of things nearby the center. And the bottom line is the takeaway from everything we learned on the convention side of the equation from both the national markets and the state and regional markets. I'll just kind of flip to the one of the final slides here is that, largely, the convention products in the greater Kansas City metro area are largely satisfying a lot of the demand that's out there. Certainly, there's a number of meeting planners that express some interest in potentially using something out of Village West with all the other amenities and the like. But there certainly is requirements with respect to the type of hotel product that would be required and the array of hotel products that are ancillary that might be helpful. And so we think that there may be some challenges with respect to really garnering a significant penetration into national market events on the convention side of the equation. And state and regional, certainly we could compete with the Overland Parks of the world and some of the other smaller facilities in Kansas City, Missouri, and throughout the state of Kansas, for instance, to get some of the state business. We could certainly compete with that. But there doesn't seem to be a really clear indication that a large traditional convention center product would be indicated for your community. And the indoor multi-purpose side of the equation too, you know, when we talk to different groups that can hold these tournaments and competitions of a variety of different sorts, you know, people get excited about this location. They get excited about Sporting KC. They get excited about the Speedway, about Schlitterbahn. They get excited about all the amenities. I mean, they're in terms of a destination for family-friendly things to do. You know, for families that are coming in for youth sports tournaments, it's exciting. I think the real question is under this particular model, you really need to find an appropriate private partner. And right now, you know, a logical private partner for an indoor amateur youth sports oriented focused building would be Sporting KC as an example. So, you know, depending on their appetite to take on a building product that would more diversify the different types of events and activities and uses that they're focusing on beyond soccer and some of the other related subsports. I guess their interest in doing that, you know, that would be one logical candidate to create some synergy, I think. But I think beyond that, you would have to identify some private entity that would want to come in and to kind of help run and operate and fund some of the operations for a building like that. We'll kind of come back to that in a minute if you have any questions. But in terms of conclusions on the market side of the equation, we're really, everything to this point is really focusing in on a scenario A that shows some of the best opportunities, I think, if it's structured correctly. I think that if this didn't have the benefit of some of the synergy and leverage that you could generate by some of the pieces that are already out at Village West, I think that it'd be a less feasible scenario. So scenario A, hockey, or I say hockey up there, but it's really minor league sports, so hockey or basketball would really be the driver of that facility model. And, you know, we just want to make sure that we're calling it as it is. If you've got a spectator arena that's all designed to be an arena, it's really the spectator, the sports, and the entertainment, which are the real drivers of that model. That being said, though, there could be synergy to tie in flat floor space, particularly if you tied it into other types of infrastructure that you could leverage what they've already got in place or what they will be building. You've got competitive strengths by virtue of your location, I think, over Independence as an example. Kemper Arena, by virtue of their old, you know, aging type of facility, which may be, you know, put out of commission here shortly, is the latest I've been hearing. I think that the importance of mitigating risk to UG through private participation and other types of commitments would be something that would be more important in your case and in other cases that I've dealt with, and we can talk about what that really means in a little bit. But then on the convention center side and the indoor multi-purpose side, I think from a market standpoint, there really isn't as much indicated market for a convention center in the traditional sense. Nor I think that, you know, I think that the market right now is pretty heavy and pretty saturated right now with these indoor multi-purpose amateur sports venues. That being said, they cost less to build. They sometimes can cost less to operate, and then the return in relative to cost sometimes can be somewhat more impressive. But in terms of the magnitude of fitting with the brand of your Village West destination, the types of activities that take place in there, and then the market opportunities, I think the scenario A probably is rising to the top right now on the market side of the equation. So in terms of site factors that go into what things we need to look at and what typically makes a good site, usually it always starts with number one, which is, you know, communities normally look at ways where they can leverage existing facility investment or infrastructure that's already in place. You've got a great benefit with lots of pieces that are already in place out of Village West that could be candidates to partner up with to create synergy that would be greater than just dropping in a project somewhere else. So if you didn't have Village West and if you didn't have some of these pieces, I think the feasibility of dropping in a scenario A would be much more marginal. But I think that by virtue of the fact that you've got that stuff out there, that I think that there's some interesting opportunities. So site location and partner issues. Scenario A, we're saying that the hotel and the retail adjacency is not critical but helpful. So for instance, with the convention center, you absolutely need the physical connection with an appropriate headquarter hotel, or you're really not optimizing your investment in the convention product in the first place. Usually, in terms of destination and competitive and peer destinations, there's usually within walking distance a variety of different types of entertainment and restaurant and retail that are right outside convention centers in most cases. That just adds to the competitive nature, because you normally have people either flying into the community, having a rental car, or taking a taxi, and then driving to the hotel, parking at the hotel, or checking into the hotel, and then just wanting to walk to everything for their 2 or 3 day convention. The arena and the multipurpose under scenario A doesn't really have that same need. However, it can certainly help. And I think under the scenario that we've outlined with scenario A, with the multi-purpose space, I think that could be certainly benefit from, as an example, if a location was near the Speedway and the committed new full-service hotel that's going in at the casino. I mean, one of the things that you're always looking for is a sizable hotel asset. And right now you've got a 250 room or 248 room, whatever that number is specifically, that's going to be going in, that's contracted to go in, and by virtue of being a full-service hotel, by definition, they already have some of their own meeting space built into that model. And so I think leveraging some of that meeting space and then that hotel asset and the food and beverage and the restaurant and some of those assets, I think makes a lot of sense to think about tying that infrastructure together, and then ultimately defraying the cost to build out a similar size flat floor venue in addition to the seated venue that you could achieve by tying those products together. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. So scenario A, again, kind of being the preferred option that we're looking at. State of the industry, multi-purpose spectator arena. There's a particular model around the country that it kind of looks like the Independence Arena, quite frankly, in terms of the seated component of that. And so it's got to have a certain level of seats. The seats are positioned in a state-of-the-art way. There's all the other amenities and the premium seating, and then the sponsorship opportunities and everything else that normally go into that particular model. We're looking at probably about 7,000 to 8,000 seats, seating capacity, which we think is right size for a secondary arena of this sort, and it matches well with what promoters could certainly benefit from on the concert, family show, and other promoted entertainment events. We think that there's some level of flexible seating, there's some level of retractable seating that normally can occur at the bottom parts of the bowl to maximize the floor area, but by and large, a lot of that seating bowl is going to be fixed. We do think that this multi-purpose space is an interesting opportunity that I think that could really maximize your ability to go after additional events, whether it be trade, whether it be consumer shows, whether it be civic events, whether it be sports events and recreation, entertainment events of some sort, conventions even. There's lots of things that could happen if you just had flat floor space. Now, the question becomes, what is the nature of that flat floor space? How big should it be in terms of square footage? We're really talking about a big box. So is it a 5,000 square foot box? Is it a 40,000 square foot box? And then is it concrete floor or is it carpeted? And things like that. It's going to have a real tall ceiling. It's going to be column free. I think that if you're partnering with a hotel and wrapping your physical product into the hotel, I think the hotel might, particularly if they had operational control over that space, would want to see that space to be carpeted. But I think that our recommendation would be that you'd have a concrete floor, flexible space as a part of that program. That would make the most sense. So about 20,000 to 40,000, I think the sweet spot would probably be a 30,000 square foot concrete floor space. If you tied it in this case, we're recommending as one of the preferred options, if you tied it into the hotel that's going to be built, then you could leverage the amount of meeting space, the carpeted space, and the banquet space and the ballroom space that they're already going to build into it. And then you could have this exhibition space that kind of flows from that. And then it would be tied into, in a more of a natural progression, into the arena. And I think that kind of building model makes a lot of sense. Would it make sense if you didn't have that hotel that's already been contractually committed to go in? It'd be more debatable whether that model would make sense. But I think by virtue of the hotel that's there, the casino asset that's right there, and the speedway that's right there, I think that those pieces can make kind of a compelling case in terms of a building product. So then we went through this whole analysis of projecting low, base, and high scenarios of event capture for this scenario A building. This will be in the report, but we're assuming a sports tenant, a minor league sports tenant. We've got some variations under the low scenario. We're kind of looking at a worst case in terms of what happens if we lose a minor league sports tenant. We've got a number of concerts programmed annually, entertainment events that are, many of them are promoted, ticketed events, family shows, and then we've got some convention trade public shows, meetings and banquets, and other events, many of which are the flat floor stuff that normally would take place in this multi-purpose square footage that's adjacent to the arena itself. Annual attendance, you'll see under the base scenario that sports tenant really is a big driver. There's no other way to look at it other than that sports tenant, the minor league sports tenant in a venue like this. And we're assuming in more of one of the highest tiers of minor league sports tenants. We think that you could get that in this marketplace. So basically, a tier or two above what Independence has, the highest tier of minor league sports. I think that would be indicated for a building like this, particularly given some of the private partners that may be at the table. And so I think that we're talking about significant attendance from the minor league sports tenant, and then all the other entertainment and the flat floor events. So in terms of attendance levels, this would be an attendance level that would be consistent with or a little bit greater than what we would see at comparable arena projects and multi-purpose venues around the country. So in terms of performance, we think you do pretty good, and I think it's a testament to both your adjacency to the greater market, the greater Kansas City, Missouri marketplace, and then also all the infrastructure that you got at Village West and that brand recognition that you've already got out at that location. So kind of giving you a capture of some of the preliminary costs to start off with. Now again, we're driving towards performance, estimating projections of events, event days, and attendance levels. And now we're looking first at costs, so cost to build, cost to run, and then we're going to get into the benefit side, economic impact, in a second. But in terms of cost, under a scenario A, order of magnitude, again, we're not architects, but we've talked to architects about this, and we're thinking about a order of magnitude preliminary cost assumptions of about $70 to $90 million to do this scenario A. And so again, that gives you the arena, that gives you the flat floor space. I've vetted this with a few different architects that design these buildings around the country and are currently working on some within this greater region. It's an expensive project. I mean, that's total hard and soft costs. Normally, for this type of building model in this type of market, you're talking about the majority of the costs of construction that are borne by the public sector. So it's not like this is an expected building model that would be a privately owned and a privately constructed project. Normally, they're a publicly owned asset that contract under a private management, either with the primary sports tenant or from a third-party private manager to run the space under contract. So you've got a big assumed public sector obligation in terms of construction costs. On the operating projections that we're looking at, if you recall in the low case, we kind of have that worst case where we wouldn't have that minor league sports tenant. So under a worst case, we're looking at a deficit. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. We wanted to make sure we kind of looked at what would happen if we kind of had this worst case scenario. And, I know that you've got some, certainly any public sector would have concerns over, who's going to cut that check when things go south, if they go south. And that's kind of the reality of what you'd be looking at it under more of a worst case. Well, under a base case, though, it's certainly we think that the projections are supporting something that could generate a fairly healthy operating profit every year. But again, this doesn't include debt service. So those operating profit and loss numbers down there in the lower left and everything on the right side of the equation there, in terms of our estimates, do not include debt service. So those are just financial operations of the building itself. Normally, we're looking at return on investment, cost benefit. We usually focus on the investment, public sector, private sector, and then all the return metrics. So the benefit side of the equation, we start with the metrics of non-local attendance driven to the area, hotel room nights, direct spending induced by all these visitors, indirect and induced spending, economic output, jobs, all these kind of metrics. This is part of the first preliminary evaluation of that. So for comparison, again, assuming that the scenario 1 or scenario A is really our preferred course, I also wanted to compare it with a scenario 2 and 3, or B and C, however you want to look at this. But the convention center model and the indoor multipurpose model. So when you start looking at these line items on the cost side, what we're starting with is that assumed one-time costs at the upper half of this slide. And then on the lower side is trying to annualize some of those costs, assuming. So the construction costs at the top there, the one-time costs, this would be costs that would be borne by the public sector, so ostensibly by UG as an example. So construction costs for hard and soft, the assumed number that we're using for scenario 1 or A is the $80 million for that project. The scenario 2 convention center project, remember, the building itself, I think we use $250 per gross square foot of construction costs applied to the building program. That would be, you know, for analysis purposes, would be kind of like the Overland Park model. Would get you about a $55 million convention center, but then you'd have to deal with the hotel. You'd have to get the appropriate hotel, and again, that's a $220,000 per key, 350 to 400 room hotel that would have to go with that to really maximize and optimize that project. So you're talking about a very expensive project to pull off scenario 2, which is partly why, in my opinion, that scenario really doesn't seem as realistic to go down that road with the scenario 2. Scenario 3 would be more the indoor multi-purpose. So you see this a lower price tag, lower finished building, lower construction cost per square foot, you know, instead of $250 per square foot, lower finish, lower support space, more like $125 to $150 per square foot. There is a private contribution under scenario 1 and scenario 3. The scenario 1 contribution would largely be, as we see around the country, kind of a naming rights or some kind of a sponsorship or a capital contribution up front by a contracted concessionaire or a leaseholder, et cetera. There's different ways that normally the private sector can contribute to help defray public sector costs, but for all, by and large, though, these are largely public funded ventures when you're looking at these. Then annualizing that to debt service. So let's just say if you're bonding the public sector obligation under scenario 1, bonding at a low interest rate of 3.5% over 30 years, you know, the annual debt service number of $3.7 million would be what the $68 million would kind of annualize to. And then looking at that under scenario 2 and scenario 3 for the public sector as debt service. And then the operating deficit under scenario 1 is shown as a negative in the cost side, which then means it's really a positive, so it's a profit instead of a deficit. But then the $500,000 we're assuming for the convention center as kind of a reasonable assumption for an operating deficit for the scenario 2, and then probably plan on a modest operating deficit for scenario 3 if you went down that road. So the point being is, at the bottom of at the end of the day, you're looking at a total annual public sector contribution that would probably be required in terms of order of magnitude, ranging from scenario 3 of a little over $1 million per year up to the $8.6 million for scenario 2. But under scenario 1, more the preferred course, you know, still getting closer to $4 million per year in terms of a public sector obligation if you bonded that debt, if you bonded the full amount. Now, there could be other ways, obviously, via star bonds and some other vehicles to not necessarily have to go down that road, or tax-exempt financing and things like that. 5 more minutes. Okay, we're on the last slide or two here. Preliminary benefit comparison. So that's the cost side of the equation. This is the benefit side. So we've started to look at metrics and kind of flowing through an evaluation of benefits. And we start with the total attendance under these different scenarios. So you'll see under scenario 1 about close to 400,000 total attendance. And then we parse that down, and we've got a very sophisticated model and approach to look at different events, how many people are overnight guests, how many people are day trippers, how long are they in town, while they're in town, where are they coming from, what are they spending their money on, how long are they in town. And that all varies by the type of event, the type of attendee, the type of spectator, the type of exhibitor, the type of sports participant, et cetera. So we drill through all this, and we get down to, you'll see direct spending in the middle there, and that is the dollars spent locally within Wyandotte County in terms of visitor spending. So the non-local spending of people that wouldn't otherwise be in the county, what they're spending in town on hotels, restaurant, retail, transportation, entertainment. So that's really your kind of your net new economic impact, the new direct spending that occurs within Wyandotte County. And then for every dollar spent, there's some layer of indirect and induced spending that's generated, and that's that second line item. And then you add those two together, and you get total economic output, which is really that annual amount of new economic activity that's driven to the county. Now, a lot of that economic impact, to be honest, is driving business. So it's people that wouldn't otherwise be in Village West that are coming in for an entertainment event or a convention or a trade show or a sporting event or what have you. And so that's a lot of the activity that's happening right now. A good chunk of this business, as you'll see there under the hotel room nights, though, would be an overnight guest. And this is assuming then that new, under scenario one, the relationship with the new Hollywood Casino Hotel. And then it drives all the way down to taxes, both state sales taxes and then UG sales and TOT taxes down at the bottom. So the money slide in terms of benefit to cost. So kind of trying to boil this all down to a real simplified look at, you'll see that first row there, economic output. So that's total net new direct spending, indirect spending, and induced spending by each of these scenarios as a ratio to cost. So the total public sector annual obligation in addition, or as it relates to the annual economic output. So when you see that number is saying 12.9, a factor of 12.9 for every economic output dollar to the cost put into it on the spending side. But when you look at only the amount of incremental tax revenue that's generated, that's the second row down there. So that's consistent around the country. Is when you look at these kind of evaluations like this, I've only seen just a case or two around the country where you actually drive more tax dollars than the actual annual obligation cost would be to the public sector, if that makes sense. We can talk about that a little bit more if you need to later. And lastly, this is the very last slide. You know, quantitative economic impact is only one piece of it. You saw in the tax dollar thing, I only looked at sales tax and TOT. Certainly there's lots of other tax source or fiscal impacts. There's lots of other non-quantifiable impacts, quality of life things, transformative, iconic effects. Just think of the different major pieces that you've got out of Village West right now. You know, the transformative, iconic effect of every one of those pieces, whether it be the Speedway, whether it be Sporting Park, whether it be the casino, you know, Schlitterbahn, all those different pieces are all really important on lots of qualitative ways that you can't necessarily quantify. And they all work together in synergy and in concert many times to help drive the brand and the visibility and the attractiveness of an overall destination. So there's lots of different reasons to think about this as opposed to just the dollars and cents. That's my 45 minutes or hour or however long it's been. I'd be happy to entertain some questions. I know this is a lot of information. Again, in a few weeks, or 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have that written report that I'm sure that you'll be willing to or be interested in digesting a little bit further as you're evaluating all this.
So I have a couple questions.
Sure.
First, before we start, I want to thank the funders for this study. The Speedway and the Convention and Visitors Bureau put in significant funds for this. We also received funding from James Arkell and the Loretto Group and from Entertainment Properties and Schlitterbahn. So we want to thank those partners for contributing to this study so that we could evaluate this really on a neutral ground. A number of these groups were looking at this kind of space, and it became clear early on that the unified government should own this study and make sure it's where we want it, particularly when you look at the amount of public investment related to each of these scenarios, that if there's going to be public investment, the public sector should own the study and not have one of the parties say, well, we did a study and it turns out it should be where we are. And this is what should be built. So we actually, to have that independent voice. So I want to thank the funders for working on that, and the UG staff for pulling this together. There's a lot of work on internally to get this study completed, and to thank CSL. Now, I have a couple of things. One, you mentioned the benefit of the proximity to the casino. I've also heard that the casino cuts two ways. One, that it brings business in, but also there are some conventioners or youth sports groups that would not come in if it's adjacent to a casino. Can you talk about the balance that you give that?
You're exactly right, and it's clear. You know, we've done thousands of interviews with meeting planners all around the country. Many times there's an issue on the table and questions that relate to the impact of gaming. So the interest or the lack of interest. You know, one of the bar charts that I flipped by really quick related to specifically that. I asked, you know, one of the questions we asked of all the meeting planners was, tell us your, you know, whether the casino would be an attractive element for your group or a distraction. You know, so you've kind of got that discussion of pro versus con. So, you know, the way that we look at this is there's no doubt about it that there's certain government groups and public sector groups and nonprofits and religious groups that will stay away from casino properties. You know, when they're looking for host facilities for the conventions, conferences, and annual meetings and things like that. There's no doubt about it. On the flip side, though, there is a give and take. So on the flip side, you know, certainly there are a number of groups that don't fit within some of those segments that look at it as an interesting amenity. You know, oftentimes to the extent that you've got a location that isn't right outside of lots of entertainment and lots of other things to do, you know, if this, you know, if Legends was right next door to the casino, you'd have the kind of the best of both worlds, but it's not. So then the ability to have other things to do and other exciting things to do, such as casino gaming, certainly is appealing to a certain subset. So my long-winded answer to that is it's a give and take. I think it's relatively neutral in terms of its net effect. I think the more important thing in this discussion is really the ability to leverage everything that they've got and the private sector money that's already been put into that and their commitment to build a hotel and the meeting space that's going to be in there. I think that's where the win is in this whole situation.
Well, that brings me to my next question. The hotel that's being planned, 250-room hotel that's being planned there, presumably those 250 rooms are needed to support the casino, or they wouldn't build a hotel larger than what they need to support, you know, their operations, and the hotel will be a primary driver for the casino. Would they need, if there were additional space attached to it, would they in fact need to add additional rooms? Would they need to make that a 400-room hotel, 250 dedicated to the casino, and then another 150 that could support this facility and have it as an integrated hotel? Or do you feel like the current size proposed of the casino hotel would be sufficient to support the scenario A facility that you talked about?
Well, I'll caveat my answer first by saying that we haven't done a hotel market study, so I can't give you a definitive answer. I guess my inclination is, having done some hotel studies around the country and having some knowledge of this, is my first reaction is a 250-room full-service hotel without a precedence or a preceding venue blazing a trail of experience in that area, you know, doesn't necessarily suggest to me that it's a slam dunk to get that in there without some additional support by virtue of an event venue. So I think that I certainly think that the event venue will help the hotel fill its rooms beyond just the transient casino gaming overnight business that it's hoping to get. I think that the hotel will help the event facility. So I think that they're definitely mutually beneficial to that end. I think that in terms of sizing it bigger, I think that my gut reaction is that 250 is already a good-sized property, and that by adding an arena and some multi-purpose space would not suggest to me that you're going to need to think about a 400-room. Would I love to see a 400-room property that's not subsidized by the public sector and the private sector just builds upon their own volition? I'd love to see that. But if 250 is what we're contractually obligated to get and we're going to get without us putting more money into the equation, I think that's a real good start. So, I mean, the hope would be that there generates enough there should be, if you add this multi-purpose space, tied into the hotel. So for instance, you know, one of the things that I would suggest or counsel you to say is if you're gonna, as government, invest this enormous amount of money next to that asset, they're already contractually obligated to build that hotel, so we know that's gonna happen regardless, right? And so if you're gonna put all this investment in there, certainly I think that does give you some leverage to discuss having the hotel partner think about erring on the larger size of its own meeting space that it's going to be putting in. So, you know, I know it's discussed about 15,000 square feet of conference space to begin with. What I would love to see complement the 30,000 square foot concrete floor space would be not 15,000 square feet of meeting space in the hotel. I'd like to see a little bit larger. I'd like to see a single ballroom to be built into that hotel of 15,000 square feet, and then maybe 5,000 square feet or 7,000 square feet of breakout rooms. So in total, you're getting maybe closer to 20 or 25,000 of the hotel meeting space, which would be physically attached then to the exhibition space. I think that would be a much more compelling mix of facility product.
Okay. The other question I wanted to go back to is just one slide previous, I think. It's the tax ratio of 0.3. So UG taxes income, this is direct cost benefit without the ancillary spending, correct?
Yeah, this is those numbers, those two numbers at the bottom. So UG sales, UG TOT. It's the 1.157 divided by total public sector annual public sector obligation of 3.7.
Okay.
Which is giving you this number. So the output to cost again would be the economic output, which is, I'm sorry, the total annual cost of 3.6 or 3.7 divided by the total output of 47.6, or vice versa, 47.6 divided by the total taxes.
Okay, so go back to that 0.3 slide.
Mhm.
What that means is we would take in a third of the taxes versus the cost of the facility, is that right? We would take in annually in direct taxes 1/3 of what the cost is.
Not directly, and I say not directly, it's not a cop-out, it's just, it's in the sense of the way that we analyze this, we try not to get too aggressive with projecting things that are more indirect or tangential. So, for instance, we only looked at sales tax and we only looked at TOT. There's other taxes coming to UG or other tax revenues that could be realized by UG. In addition, there's mutually beneficial things happening here that we haven't quantified. So for instance, the event center helps the hotel. The hotel then gets helped and its operations gets helped, and a lot of the different things it's doing gets helped by virtue of having a healthy business relationship. So there's other types of spending occurring and other types of tax revenues coming in that aren't necessarily quantified just in that number. So that's part of it, and that's a start. That's a way to look at it. If you had to add up everything and say, strictly speaking, from a incremental standpoint, are we generating more tax dollars for unified government relative to what we're spending on this? The answer is no, we're not.
Okay, say that one more time.
So
Just the last part, just the last sentence.
the very last part is
Just before you said no.
The last part is, it is unlikely that the incremental tax dollars generated by virtue of this investment is unlikely to exceed the cost to put into it.
So if you just went based on tax revenue input, it would not support it. You would have to go to the output, the total output.
You would have to go to the output on some of the intangible, indirect things that are the benefits that most communities will always look at. So for instance, these numbers, that bottom row, the 0.3, those are consistent with other exercises I've done around the country. Yours benefits to a higher degree, though, I would say, for a number of reasons. One is you've got willing and able private partners, who a lot of other communities don't have. You've also got the ability to tap into synergy of nearby population bases. So
in some cases, you know, if you're more of an isolated community, you know, you're not drawing as many people outside of your taxing district. You've got all this activity that's being driven in, so therefore, these numbers are actually higher than what we would see in many different communities when we do the same exercise, including communities that have built products like this.
So the 12.9 is high.
It's a healthy number. That's the way that we've shown this calculation and this comparison here. That 12.9 is higher than what we've done or what we've calculated in other markets. Yes.
Okay. All right, does anyone else have any questions? This is our first blush at this. We will get a copy of the full report, and we will have another opportunity to talk about this. We're not voting on this today. We're just looking at it. This is the first time we've taken a look at it, and I think the next step is going to be talking with our private partners who have an interest in it to see what the possibilities are moving forward. But this is the first blush at the report. And so does anyone have any questions for CSL while they're here? So thorough, your report. Either we're completely stumped.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for this presentation. This is very helpful. And again, it's a little in-service on convention space. It's just something we have to learn and understand before we move forward with it. So I appreciate very much your time and investment in this. I appreciate, again, our funders, appreciate the UG staff, and I appreciate the commission asking the question to look into this, because ultimately what we're looking for is, are there other drivers to tourism and benefit to the community that we can put out that are going to benefit our community as a whole? And I think that's our goal. So thank you for that. We do, I believe, if there's no further questions, Mr. Bach, do you have any comment you'd like to make?
No, at this time, we just need to go to executive session.
All right, so we are going to excuse ourselves to executive session. We'll need a motion for that, and then we'll be downstairs at 7 o'clock. So I'll take a motion to be in executive session for 30 minutes regarding litigation.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
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 We are excused to the room right next door on the 5th floor. Thank you.